So, I'm a very recently divorced single mother living with my very recent 2 weeks, living with my four adult children who range from the age of 20 to 35 years old. Now, one day over the summer, my oldest woke up feeling really crappy. It was during the god awful heat wave, so I sent him to rest in the AC. A few hours later, I went to go check on him, and he was clearly in much worse shape than I had previously thought. He was doubled over in pain and pacing the room. He couldn't keep anything down, not even water. So, after testing for COVID and the required self diagnosing Googling, we ran over to the local emergency room where, after the mandatory hours of waiting and more testing, at last it was deemed that it was his appendix that was the culprit. So, the hospital scheduled his surgery for the next morning, and I was sent home to wait. It was his first time under the knife, and while it would be routine and laparoscopic, there's always that fear of introducing anesthesia. So thankfully, everything went as planned, and his surgeon called me the next morning to report on his condition. He complained a whole bunch, but healed up, and now he's totally fine. That's a pretty boring story, right? Nothing too exciting there. He got sick, he got better, big whoop. But you see, this is my very firstborn child having his very first surgery. And it was also the first time that I, his mother, was there to share any first with him. The simple act of being able to act the part of his concerned mother was indeed a big whoop, because none of this was ever supposed to happen. Not when my pregnancy started out like this. Claudia, you are pregnant. What are you going to do? A baby is going to ruin your life. These were the first words uttered to me by a trusted family friend upon her basically outing me on my condition. I can't raise your baby, is what my mother said when I told her of the upcoming birth of her first grandchild. This is annoying me. Then she asked, what will the neighbors say? Yeah, I was 19. Yes, I was a art school dropout already. No, I wasn't nearly finished with my education. And yes, I still had to live at home. No, the father was not to be counted on for support. And no, we would not be getting married. Then 3 different doctors at 3 different clinics told me I was too far along and I would be having a baby in September. They were either wrong or lied about my due date, as Max was born in mid-November. But it doesn't matter because the results were the same. I left the building and went home. And I remember walking out of the last clinic and stopping by a diner somewhere around the Flatiron building. And I ordered a grilled Swiss and bacon sandwich. And it came on one of those classic white china plates, with the little green lines around the edge. And I'm pretty sure I had a vanilla egg cream and sipped it as I wondered what I was going to do. And so I did what any nice middle-class girl from the Long Island suburbs does, based on the knowledge gleaned from those formative after-school specials. I literally plucked the idea of adoption from midair as the glorious solution to my immediate and literally belly-pressing problem. Now, adoption, as I understood it at the time, just made logical sense. I clearly was going to have a baby and can look back now and admit that I probably presented as quite a hot mess. I was aware that my own family was seriously dysfunctional and in a not so healthy manner, and that it would be quite unkind to even consider bringing an innocent child into what literally was a shit show. And on the flip side, there were all these lovely couples just ready and waiting in all their life's perfection for a child. And of course, it would be better if I could make someone else's dreams come true at the same time of providing everything for my own baby and not completely screwing up my own life in the process by becoming just another unmarried teenage mother. So clearly, it was the perfect win-win scenario. So I got out the Manhattan phone book and started making phone calls to adoption agencies. The adoption agencies all agreed that indeed it was a good idea to relinquish my baby to adoption. And in fact, they told me, only the strongest, smartest, wisest, most caring mothers are the ones that could make the ultimate sacrifice for their babies. I wanted to be one of those mothers. I wanted to be a strong mother. So I picked the agency with the prettiest name and the perkiest voice on the other side of the phone, and they sent me a plane ticket, and I left everyone I knew and moved to an unknown city, lived among strangers, and relied on the kindness of the adoption agency for the final 2 months of the pregnancy. My mother stopped speaking to me. No one visited. In my life's timeline, we now call that when I went to Boston. I'm not going to bore us all with the repetition of a birth story and perfect fingers and perfect toes. And I'm not going to re-traumatize myself by going into the great details, not that I remember much, about forcing myself to walk out of that hospital empty-handed. And I'm not going to try to remember the final words I whispered to my newborn son before I let him go. I'm not even going to touch on assuming that everyone here, even for one painful second, can imagine how very difficult it might be to go years, decades, even a full lifetime without knowing about the well-being of your first, last, and maybe only child. I'm very good at examining the loss and the grief and the heartache. I can tell you about the years of tears and trauma. I literally have made a career out of it. But I really don't live that life of a birth mother anymore. You see, my son came home. I relinquished Max in 1987. He was 48 hours old when he left my arms in the hospital and 72 hours old when I signed the relinquishment consents. I received an update through the agency at 6 months and 1 year. That was it. I learned to be patient and wait. I also learned to Google, and that turned out to be very handy indeed. I found him online in 2004, thanks to Google, and 3 dear internet friends, an adoptive mother, an adult adoptee, and a surrogate mom. It took us 3 days based on the non-identifying information given to me in my Dear Birth Mother letter, some 17 years before. We had direct contact through MySpace back in 2005. He was almost 18. And in 2007, we met for the first time, 19 years, 111 days after I saw him last. Then later that year, I got married, and he came to the wedding. Divorced now. He met all his siblings and pretty much everyone else in my life. Came to my 40th birthday party. Visits ebbed and flowed in the next decade or so. Sometimes we lost the thread of connection and communication went silent, as it often happens in even the best of reunions. I suppose it could have ended there. We could have just let it peter away and die out, but we managed to wade through, and instead we both agreed that it was really silly, and we promised not to be so lame again. And our contact became more to increase. We saw him more, and then even more. And then we started to create our own new family traditions, Halloween parties, and annual Star Wars movies in early December. Meanwhile, sadly, his relationship with his adoptive family was becoming increasingly strained, and it pretty much ceased to exist in any healthy manner. He was caring for his elderly adoptive grandparents, and he was started to come to our house for the holidays instead. My other kids would ask him, "When are you moving to New York?" And over time, the answers changed from if to when. And then the time came. His grandparents had both passed, and we rented a U-Haul, packed up his worldly possessions, literally handed in a key, and drove back to New York one final time. It was surreal. Now, on paper, we might call that a failed or disrupted adoption. From a birth parent perspective, honestly, it's pretty much a dream fantasy come true. However, like pretty much all things in life, and definitely in the child welfare arena, almost every gain is built upon a loss, and my family story is no different. For my family to become whole again, his absence caused a literal hole in his adoptive family. In our story, adoption didn't really work out for any of us. I often say it didn't take, as none of us got what we expected. And then there's the harsh reality that my charmed life represents an adoptive family's nightmare. And sometimes it's hard not to think of myself as a living, breathing birth parent boogeyman. And often I have to accept that for some folks, including probably, sadly, my son's adoptive parents, I truly am. Yet, I would not trade it for the world or all the tea in China or even a gazillion dollars. We have coffee every morning together and endless conversations all the day. My kids, all my kids and myself have meshed into a really strong family unit. And unlike many reunions, I believe, we have this confidence that has managed to erode the invasive feelings of doubt and the fear of rejection and actually healed the rifts that time apart has created. And I'm at the point now where I can't possibly imagine not knowing my oldest son, Max. And I can almost imagine a time, or I almost can't imagine a time anymore where I didn't know who or where my child was. Almost. But still, every moment of my life right now is a little miracle. Every interaction between my kids is literally a stolen moment that was never supposed to happen. Every cup of coffee shared is a bonus of life that I never expected to get. And sometimes something pretty yucky, like emergency surgery, can have an incredible silver lining. That's all I got.